What's going on, Dawson Wheeler?
Just getting back from the Natchez Trace. A couple of days of cycling down the trace, chasing my buddy Lee.
Wow. How'd that go?
You know, I did great. We did 200 miles. We did 100 miles a day, and we did it in about 5 hours and 20 minutes. About 5 hours and 20 minutes a day. And Lee did the lion's share of the work. I kind of sat on his wheel and drafted most of it, but it was great, and it was beautiful, especially at the bottom end down near Natchez, Mississippi. You got into the live oaks and some of the swampy lands down below Jackson, Mississippi.
You used the word drafting, which is normally for, auto racing and NASCAR.
Oh, we were rubbing.
Look at you, rubbing.
There was some rubbing.
Look at you.
There was some drafting.
Any crashes?
There was no crashes.
Well, then you're out. Never mind.
It was good. My wife ran support for us the whole way down.
So she was changing tires, and she was the pit crew?
Yeah, she was the pit crew.
Look at you.
We did have an extra set of tires along too, but we never used them. So
you got the drills and stuff at the.
We had it all. It was great.
Well, that's cool, man. I will say this because these things are evergreen, but I got to talk about today and the next 4 or 5 days on the forecast here where we live, Southeast Tennessee.
Spectacular.
5 days on the forecast here where we live, Southeast Tennessee.
Spectacular.
Golly. And the thing they always talk about the South is the humidity. And one of the questions I'm going to ask our guest, I've always heard 100 degrees where he lives, 100 degrees where we live. It's the humidity. Well, I can tell you right now, where I live right now, no humidity hardly.
No, it's great. I'm leaving tomorrow at daybreak and heading up to the Smoky Mountains, and I'm taking my neighbor's daughter, who you hear me talk about a lot. And we're going up and do a long hike tomorrow in the mountains in the high country, so it's going to be perfect.
I do have one question, then we'll give you the floor to introduce our guest. Are we working on getting Christy Parsons back?
Yeah, she's working up some stuff right now on history and bears.
Well, you said you're going to the Smokies. That's why I
won't see her, but I'm going to be up there tomorrow.
All right, man, what are we doing today, though? We're talking deserts, aren't we?
We're talking desert life and desert time, and we've got a friend of mine I've known for, I guess, about 25, maybe 30 years. A friend of mine I've known for, I guess, about 25, maybe 30 years, and he's a hero, man. He's been kind of an idol of mine. We worked together on different boards through times going on. He was an outdoor retailer for a long time. His name is Dave Baker, and he lives in Tucson, Arizona, and besides being a great businessman, and get this, he started his business in high school in his house, outdoor retail, and that's a whole separate podcast.
I might get him on my radio show.
But he's one of the greatest outdoor enthusiasts. I mean, he's a backpacker, he's a hiker, a rock climber, a kayaker. I don't know how you kayak in the desert. But we got Dave Baker on the line. How you doing, Dave?
Hey, Dawson. It's great to be here. Hi, Clint.
How are you, sir?
Very well, thanks.
How's the weather down there?
Well, it's a dry heat. Yeah, we're in Tucson today. We're pushing about 107 degrees. Today, we're pushing about 107 degrees, and that's kind of a pretty typical day for early June. But, Clint?
Yes, sir.
Dry heat makes a difference. If you kind of move slow and take it easy, you can really have some really pleasant days out, even in this type of heat. It's when that darn humidity seeps in that things get tough.
Well, I'm older now, and I've never been a fan of heat. And I grew up here in the South, so heat and humidity go hand in hand. I don't really get one without the other, except maybe a month in the fall, maybe a month in the spring. But when I look on the national weather map and I see temperatures, it makes me anxious for you. I get nervous for people I know. I'm like, isn't that like, doesn't water boil? What temperature are we boiling stuff? I mean, that's hot. 107's hot.
It is. Though, I grew up here in Tucson, and I was a little boy, and in the summertime when school was out, you never complained about the heat. You were just so thrilled to be out of school, playing with your friends, having all day long to do stuff that the thought about complaining about the heat never crossed your mind. And hey, I mean, you got to stay safe. You can't get hurt, and heat can hurt you. But with a little can't get hurt, and heat can hurt you. But with a little planning and a little flexibility and a little change in attitude, the dry heat, at least, I don't think is all that bad.
Dave, you've had a lifelong passion of the Colorado Plateau. That includes Grand and the Canyonlands and Bears Ears and all those zones down there. And I've had limited experience going in. I've been to Escalante once, got lost. I've done a couple of slot canyons that I had guides, and I would have been lost without the guides. But what is it about people that love it? They deeply love it. What is the attraction? Because there's prickly things down there. There's things that rattle. There's things that'll bite you. You got a lot of reptiles. But what is it about the passion? You got a lot of reptiles. But what is it about the passion that going into those zones for you?
Well, hey, first I've got to acknowledge that the planet provides us really an embarrassment of riches when it comes to wild beauty, even still with all the people that are crawling around the place. And wild places, in my view, all over the country and all over the world are just so inspiring and so beautiful. And the desert, and specifically the desert southwest of the United States, just has just one slice of that foremost: big sky, open spaces, twisted, unbelievable, unexpected landscapes and topography, star-filled skies, Milky Way displays. The bones of the earth are kind of exposed in deserts. There's not that much vegetation in many cases, so even if you're not a student of the discipline, you're exposed to geology, and you get sort of hammered with a feeling of time, seeing all these unique rock formations, lava flows, old volcanoes, and so forth. I don't know. There's more. The ecology. You talk about the harsh environments. I mean, the adaptations that the plants and the animals and insects and bugs make to live in these places. It's pretty fantastic. Yeah, you got to kind of watch your step, but it's the lives of these creatures and so forth. And another thing I like about it, there's a lot of places in the world to do this, but the desert Southwest is a great playground if you like off-trail adventures. The sort of the exposed landscapes off-trail and trying to cover distances and getting from point A to point B just via your own route. I love that.
Let me test your...
Real quick, I was going to say, I like Dave's description, Dawson, way better than yours.
How so?
Look, when you were asking about it, there's things that bite and prickly and sun. And then when you were asking about it, there's things that bite and prickly and sun. And then I hear him talk about it, and I'm like, I like his version of it than Dawson's.
Well, my only experience in the desert Southwest was on the Tour Divide. And when I came through New Mexico, it was at the end of my journey, and I was super tired. And I think part of me not falling in, I was just rushing to get down to the Mexican border. So I was in this great big hurry, and everything was kind of holding me up.
You had purpose.
The deep sand was kind of cactus that have these little kind of ball bearings with spikes all over them. I forgot what they call these.
I think they call them choyas. I think that's what you're thinking of.
Yeah, they get in your tires and you get flats, and there was just all these little things that were holding me back. And then I remember one rain day, it brought me through,
wow.
And they were out on the road, and I was like, man, I don't know, But okay, I want to test your, for our readers, because when we start diving into some of these conversations, there's going to be words that are specific to the Southwest. Let's just see if you know them. Aurora. Is that how you pronounce it? A dry riverbed?
Oh, arroyo. Oh, yeah. Hey, Dawson, you had me thinking of the Aurora Borealis up in Alaska. And
how do you pronounce it?
It's arroyo.
Okay.
Arroyo, and kind of the more arroyo, and kind of the more commonly used word among the natives down here would be wash.
Okay.
Which is basically a dry stream bed.
Adobe.
Well, that is a baked chunk of mud and clay into a big brick, and you build houses out of it. They used to, anyway.
Okay. Let's see. Let me give you Mesa.
Oh, Mesa. Sort of like an uplift of land that has more or less a flattish top. Maybe a ring of cliffs protecting the. I had no idea. And this is a little scary. I still have
just make up a
nightmares,
word. Dawson, just make up a word. Just come up.
No, I just figured at some point Dave was going to be like throwing out some of these. Like you go down, you go this way and you go into this wash, and we go into this wash, and we always talk when we have climbers on and they're talking about red pointing and first ascents.
And I have to ask, hey, what does that mean, guys?
What's it mean? I don't know.
What does that mean?
So, prickly pear.
Prickly pear. Do you guys have prickly pears back in your area?
No.
Oh, there are. You guys have prickly pears back in your area?
No.
Oh, they're all over the place. It's a species of cactus, and they call them patty cactus sometimes. They're sort of flat, big, flat, fleshy. They're not really leaves, succulent parts, and in my area down here in Tucson, prickly pear, they're almost like they're everywhere.
You've got the...
And in the cactus world, they're not too awful. If you have the misfortune of falling into a prickly pear, which I have, you trip and you stumble and fall into one of these things, you'll spend 20, 30 minutes picking the spines out of you, but they're not bad, not like those choyas you were talking about, Dawson. You get tangled up with choya, and you've got a little bit of pain to endure to get those things out of you.
A couple of more. Rio.
I missed that?
Rio.
Oh, Rio. River.
Yep.
I think that's Spanish for river.
Yeah.
We don't have rivers down here. We've got washes where I live. Rivers down here. We've got washes where I live.
And I saw these along my way, so this is the final one. We'll get past the test.
I was going to say,
he's going to get 100 on it, though. Hoodoo.
Hoodoo?
Hang on, Clint, do you know what a hoodoo is?
Listen, you don't want to ask me those kind of questions. I'll make up something that's completely...
Okay.
Oh, man, hoodoos are fantastical rock formations. I mean, maybe not rock. Sometimes they're mud formations. But they happen up in the sandstone country where you'll have a layer of soft geology going on and a cap rock. You get these tall, fantastically shaped structures. I mean, sometimes these things are 30, 40, 50, 60 feet high with this softer sandstone being protected by a cap rock up on top. I mean, that's the kind that I'm most familiar with. I'm sure there's other varieties.
Yeah, those are the ones I'm familiar with. If you were a giant...
varieties.
Yeah, those are the ones I'm familiar with. If you were a giant, Clint, and you had a giant hula hoop, this would be a place to go and, play a drinking game where you could throw your hula hoop over a hoodoo.
It's like the amusement park ring over the Coke cans.
Yeah, just imagine giants running around with a big hula hoop and a couple of cold beers and playing some kind of drinking game out in the desert. So
that's a book. Maybe we should write a book. That's a sci-fi book.
Okay, Dave. So I got off topic a little bit, but that's the way these podcasts go. So going into the Southwest and because I hear a lot of people from all over the country heading to the Southwest, including myself, and I've been down to the canyon, but there are things, and we talked about the heat, but when you're gearing up, what are some of the things that you really need to be conscious of when you're going even on a day trip?
Well, hey, I mean, first of all, at one level, you're just going out. You're just going outside, and so most of your gear isn't really different from kind of a normal pack load. That really different from kind of a normal pack load that people carry outside, no matter where they are. I mean, cold, for example, can be an issue some seasons of the year. So sometimes you're worrying about carrying enough warm clothing, but in remote areas, when you're off trail, especially maps and GPS are critically useful. There's the other usual suspects: food, first aid supplies, and water treatment gear if you're out for multiple days. But when it comes to desert hiking, you can tick down a pretty short list. Sun protection, it's important. In addition to sunscreen, hats and long shirt sleeves really can be helpful. And they're not widely used, but some use solar umbrellas. And on hot, sunny days, these things are remarkably effective. They can create a noticeably cooler microclimate under them, and it makes a difference if you have to keep moving in the sun. You got to have adequate water carrying capacity. I mean, when you're on the day hike, it's pretty simple. You just carry enough for the day. But on multi-day day packs, a lot of times you're faced with the prospect of having a dry camp. You'll get caught. Collapsible containers, the platypus style, are absolutely ideal for that. They're lightweight, and when you're not using those collapsible containers, they just don't take up any room in your pack. Yeah, a lot of desert backpackers reasonably forego the use of enclosed tents. They'll use tarps or sleep under overhangs and things like that. But other people, and I would be in this category, I do get concerned about venomous creatures crawling around at night. I'm particularly nervous about scorpions. And lightweight tents with a nice little zippered netted door on them can really provide a lot of peace of mind.
I hate to interrupt the stream of thought there, but have you had run-ins with any of these venomous creatures that we see or you've been talking about?
Well, yeah, I know out in your neck of the woods, you guys see rattlesnakes, I'm pretty sure.
Mm-hmm. Copperhead.
The southeast area, the snake of choice around here is going to be a copperhead. The copperhead in our part of the world is like a yellow jacket. He's angry, he's pissed off, and he's looking to fight. Yeah, a rattlesnake, for the most part, is rather elusive, and they would prefer to get out of your way. They're not angry. They have to be kind of provoked, and it would be very abnormal. You hear rattlesnake dens and things like that. That would be you hear rattlesnake dens and things like that. That would be highly abnormal for a hiker to really run into that. And of course, once you move into elevation, I would say 3,000 feet and up. So when you get into the Pisgah and the Smoky Mountain ranges and the Blue Ridge, you're going to see less and less snakes as you move up higher.
Well, your description of the personality of the rattlesnake, I think, is spot on. That's a great description for the species we have out here as well. But you got to keep eyes on ground and pay attention. If you accidentally step on one or even sit on one, I mean, that's not far. In the Southwest, seen tons of rattlesnakes. And Dawson, like you, I sort of have them in the no big deal department in my mind. However, respectful and alert at all times. I've been stung several times in my life by scorpions, and I have real respect for them. But it's nasty, and it's an experience that I really want to avoid. It's not like this is a common problem. It's not like everyone on every trip faces this, but I've been stung often enough that I take a lot of comfort from being inside a tent and just simply not having to worry about. A super colorful venomous creature down in our neck of the woods is the Gila monster. Have you ever heard of those? Probably have.
Yeah.
They're an ancient lizard, beaded, orange and black pattern on them, and they're no big deal. They're actually they're wonderful to see. They're no big deal. They're actually they're wonderful to see. They're not aggressive. They stay out of your way. They don't bother you. Actually, in the southern tier of the Southwest deserts, this would be southern Arizona, southern New Mexico, southern California, and so on. Really, the emerging over the last couple of decades have been Africanized bees. They are really something you kind of want to be aware of when you're walking around, and you want to avoid accidentally provoking a nest or walking too close to one of their nests, because the consequences can be pretty nasty.
Is that a great?
The Africanized bees, they love to nest in cliff faces.
Okay.
Cracks and holes and little rocky cliff outcrops and things like that. And it's just worth being alert. If you become aware of a lot of bees buzzing around, it's time to kind of stop and take stock. Bees buzzing around, it's time to kind of stop and take stock of, where they're coming from, and just getting oriented so you don't accidentally march into the middle of their hive.
And I guess, like, in any kind of backpacking situation, I mean, your own personal health and medications, if you're anaphylactic or when you get stung, the need of Benadryl and things like that. Obviously, you just got to have that in your own personal kit and be mindful of that, because a scorpion bite or something, I would assume you have to.
Hasten to add that, hey, these problems aren't, they're not endemic. I mean, it's not like this stuff's happening every day. When I think about going back into your area, something that really terrifies me is poison ivy. We don't have as much poison ivy out here, I don't think, and it's something that really bothers me. And you think, yeah, no big deal.
No, poison ivy is a big deal, and it can be a game-changing thing, and for certain people, it can be virtually immediate. So, I mean, you can get into poison ivy, and if you're very sensitive or alert, kind of hyper, and if you're very sensitive or alert, kind of hypersensitive to it, you could walk through it and get it all over you. And of course, sweating and things will speed up the process. But yeah, 3 hours later, I mean, you could really be in a bad way. In fact, a friend of both of ours, all he has to do is look at it and he can get it. And I've seen it cover his face and eyes and stuff. But again, all these things are rare occurrences that happen in the backcountry. You just, like anywhere, it's good to know what you're walking through and know what to tell things. We've also got these things called stinging nettles that are on the side of a trail that can bite you a little bit from time to time. But hey,
there you go. Just keep your eyes open and have fun, mostly, I think.
In water filtering, at least in the creeks that we have, at least in the creeks that we have in the Cherokee Forest and, the Smoky Mountains and up in the Blue Ridge, they're very clear streams, and we don't have any kind of silt in our streams. So when we're purifying water, typically with filters, we don't run into any kind of clogging. We just got to go through the process of filtration for all the other things that we want to get out while we're filtering. Is siltation a problem with water filters in the Southwest?
Well, it certainly can be. I mean, especially up in like that, where sometimes the creeks run with sediment in them.
I mean, do you ever use a cheesecloth or a bandana? Or
I don't. On some trips, when I think that's going to do, I will carry a collapsible bucket and let sediment settle out overnight and pump or treat the water the next day.
Okay, that's a great idea.
And by the way, this is just a personal thing. I got really sick of pumps after a couple of years. I mean, they came out a long time ago, and I grew really weary. After a couple of years, I mean, they came out a long time ago, and I grew really weary of them pretty quickly. It just seemed to me to be a lot like work. And I've really moved to the Sterapins and actually sometimes chemical treatments, chlorine dioxide and things like that. Just do something. But yeah, settling in a collapsible bucket works great. Or your pots and pans, you can keep those out overnight and settle water out that way.
Let's talk about certain areas. Let's pick one. Let's go for a favorite. Some of the big news. Escalante, Grand Canyon.
I don't know. It's talked about a lot, but you've got to talk about the Grand Canyon. It is on the Colorado Plateau, and compared to other of the big attractions on the Colorado Plateau, I think one of the things about the canyon that will really startle you after you've been around it for a while is just the scale. It's not called grand for nothing. The postcards, the magazine layouts, the web pictures just don't prepare you for the experience of trying to get from the top of one of the rims, north or south, down to the river, and maybe doing some moving around in between. It is really fantastically huge, and sometimes overwhelming. The beauty, the sense of time, the landscapes, the flora, the fauna. It's absolutely fantastic. Not for the faint of heart. I mean, the corridor trails going down to Phantom Ranch and things like that are totally doable. Going down to Phantom Ranch and things like that are totally doable, really pleasant hikes or backpacking trips. But if you venture off trail in the Grand Canyon and try to do some of the more remote loops, for example, get ready. You're going to really be tested, and you're really going to be treated. To a wilderness experience really like no other. It is fantastic.
Well, do me a favor. What does that explain a little bit, just for somebody like me who's never done that? When you say when you get off trail, it's going to be more difficult. Is it just the contour of the land? Is it much different?
Well, Clint, I could just say yes to everything you just said. First of all, the rocks or whatever, the debris, the scree, the talus, or whatever you want to call it, is comprised mostly of sandstones and limestones. And the limestones, especially in the Grand Canyon, they're rough, they're abrasive, and they tear up your gear. And it's very demanding just to walk on. Again, when you're off trail, you just flat out got to pay attention every step. Route finding and water every step. Route finding and water become critical. The Grand Canyon, as you know, is one of its big features that you notice are the bands of cliff that just go for hundreds of miles in some cases at one elevation. And then on top of that cliff will be but then there's another cliff that rises above that, and so on, cascading up to the rims and down to the river. And navigating these cliff features when you're trying to find water is another big challenge, having a good concept of where do I got to get to break through this layer of the spring at the base of it that I need to get to tonight before I run out of water. So the navigation is it's critically important. It's not like you can just sort of wander around and kind of make things up as you go. You really got to have a pretty firm idea of what you're trying to do.
And in terms of skill sets, I mean, for people that are considering off-trail hiking in the Grand Canyon, besides navigation, scrambling and some basic rock craft is probably pretty important, isn't it?
Well, sure. You have to be, I would say, easy on your feet, comfortable, empty space beneath you in some cases, and a willingness to move through rough terrain. And Clint, another way to put it, on some of these Grand Canyon loops I've done in the past, a 6-mile day, for example, that's a big day till practically dark.
Wow.
To knock off that 6 miles because of all the micro and macro barriers that are thrown in front of you. And you may have only traced out 6 or 7 miles on your little GPS track, but you feel like you've done 20.
The Grand Canyon, it's a national park. So what permitting is necessary for overnight use?
Well, you need a permit. And, I would certainly recommend checking the National Park Service webpage because I may not be up on all the latest, but a system for applying for permits remotely. I'm not sure how they do it anymore. It used to be via fax. Maybe they have a web-based thing at this point. and they hold back a certain number of permits for people that show up in person, at the ranger station at the Grand Canyon. The permits are distributed station at the Grand Canyon. The permits are distributed based on these use areas, and you can have a use area that sort of fills up, if you will, and you may have to modify your plans or wait another time before you can get the exact permit you want. But I will say that don't be deterred. I've never really been turned away from a great trip in the canyon for lack of a permit. You can almost always get what you need. The most difficult permits to get really are the ones where you spend the night down at Phantom Ranch. Popular, and a lot of people want to do it. But by the way, I make it sound like it's a lot of people, though, how awful to have all these people around here. If you ever get a chance to draw a permit at Phantom Ranch, grab it. It's a magnificent experience, a stunning location, and you get a chance to experience some of the Grand Canyon culture, if you will. Going way back, you're going to be involved with mule skinners and hikers and river runners, and go to the Phantom Ranch canteen, knock down a beer after 5:30. It's fun.
Yeah, that's awesome. Do you
after 5:30? It's fun.
Yeah, that's awesome. Do you if you're a first-time Grand Canyon visitor, would you recommend going to the South Rim or the North Rim?
Heck, I think it would be what your tastes are. Or readily accessible trail options. And there's kind of like more to do on your first visit. They're both pretty great. I think for a first visit to the Grand Canyon, if you're thinking about hiking, one thing to really think about is you don't have to be a super person to do this, but you do have to be aware that in the Grand Canyon, you go down first rather than up first. And so you sort of get a pounding going downhill. Your quads and so forth are going to be tested. And then at the end of your, midway are going to be tested. And then at the end of your, midway through the day, you go, well, I got to get back out of here. And I think your first trip at the Grand Canyon, if you're new to it, I'd say start slow and find out where you are on that scale so that you don't get into a situation where you're really having a struggle to get back up to the rim.
Yeah, good advice. Bear's ears.
Bear's ears. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of districts, if you will, in the Bear's Ears area. One of my favorites is the Cedar Mesa area, I guess. And in contrast to the Grand Canyon, the Grand Canyon is marked by just epic relief. Whatever it is, it's like 9,000 or 7,000 feet down to 2,000 feet. Just these huge elevation gains and drops and so forth. And the Cedar Mesa drops and so forth. And the Cedar Mesa area, the canyons there are rarely more than 500 or 600 feet deep, and usually it's more like 200 or 300 feet deep. So it just has a completely different character. It's really fun to explore. There's more vegetation, and like a lot of areas in the Bear's Ears area, the Cedar Mesa district has lots of Native American archaeology to look at, Indian ruins and pictographs and things of that nature. And it is called, and you just get a completely different look at the Colorado Plateau. Love that place.
And it's just far more remote in terms of services, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. One of my favorite modes in the Bear's Ears is to do a combination. Well, actually, car camping in hundreds and hundreds of, unimproved remote truck or, van or car camping places scattered all over the area. And you can just spend weeks and weeks doing fabulous day hikes and moving your car doing fabulous day hikes and moving your car camp every so often to get into new areas. Great place.
Best time to be there?
Pardon me?
When would be the best time to go?
Oh yeah. Yeah, probably depending on the elevation. Yeah, probably depending on the elevation, mid-September all the way through mid-May.
When it's not 107.
When it's not 107. Bears ears, though, you got to worry about getting cold. It's at a slightly higher elevation, and, starting in elevation, and, starting in mid-November and going on into February, it's pretty chilly. I would prefer not to be up there. I've kind of become a bit of a lizard, a desert rat, if you will, and I would avoid that.
I'm listening to you describe these different locations, and I've had this experience when Dawson's had other guests on. When you ask them what's one or two of your favorite places, the way people describe, and I love the word you used earlier, culture, but the way you describe it's a personality. And it's almost like when you try to tell people the difference between your kids or friends, they take on these characteristics of people. It's like it's because you can describe 2 or 3 different places and you actually have completely different personalities, and I can tell the energy in your voice when you're describing them. You love them all for different reasons.
Hey, Clint, you're spot on. I mean, and that's one of the great things about the Colorado Plateau generally. It presents one of the great things about the Colorado Plateau generally. It presents so much. In some places, it's soft, cool, green, placid, quiet. In other places, it's harsh, prickly, bright. It's harsh, prickly, bright. You got to squint your eyes. Brutal work to get places in some areas. In other areas, it's kind of like an idyllic day from your childhood summer. I mean, it's just all over the place. And a childhood summer. I mean, it's just all over the place. And I've always felt that with the Colorado Plateau, how many lifetimes would you need to check these things out?
Well,
I'm not even close.
Well, you said it earlier when we started off. The world is full of it. I've heard people talk about the Cumberland Plateau, and that's one of the reasons I love doing this podcast. Most people listening to this, no matter what state or what country, within a few hours of your house, more than likely, you are surrounded by some beauty that you probably have no idea about. You probably no clue about.
Spot on. I grew up, I think I was 55 years old when I decided to walk the Arizona Trail. The Arizona Trail had more or less just been established. It had only had maybe 100 people that had done it by then, and I decided to do it. So, hey, here's an Arizona native. I know all about Arizona. I've got a genius figured out a way to run a 800-mile trail up the length of my state. And, man, it showed me I didn't know what was here. It was just so beautiful, and every section of the state had something different to offer. It was eye-opening. And I realized then, just what you're saying, Clint, that all this beauty and adventure, really, it surrounds us. Part of it is just, I don't know, awareness, having a good friend tell you, hey, look, this is really good. You got to give this a try.
How often do you go solo very often?
I used to, but not so much anymore. Hey, I'm 68 years old, and I find myself these days enjoying companionship on a number of levels. One, it's fun, good friends, and a nice warm fire. Can't beat that. And I like having support, frankly, at this age. I appreciate having a little bit of help when I need it. And, as a younger man, I didn't have those feelings as strong, and I did a lot more solo stuff. But, hey, the world turns and times change.
Well, I totally agree. I do a lot myself, but when I'm going overnight, it's nice to go out with a companion, and you can share a little gear. That obviously cuts a little weight, but more importantly, the fire, and after a long day and some stories, and maybe take an adult beverage out there with you, maybe you don't, and maybe you take an adult beverage out there with you, maybe you don't, but it's just,
Absolutely. Desert margaritas are a must. And in terms of gear, that has been a comfort for me. I mean, some folks sort of talk these gadgets down a little bit, but the satellite beacons, the InReach, those sorts of devices, I like them. I sort of feel like I have more freedom than I might otherwise to, push myself a little deeper into things.
I used to spot the Tour Divide, and it was nice. Now I would move to an InReach because you can text off of an InReach, right?
That is correct. I use that to communicate with my wife. My wife likes my InReach as much as I do, right? It's a way to stay in touch for these things.
Yeah, and she can be engaged at a certain level.
These things.
Yeah, and she can be engaged at a certain level. She can go to the computer and see where you are, and if you need to communicate, hey, I'm running a little late, that's always nice. It's better than the old days when I would just lay up an extra day and scare my wife to death before I came out of the woods, and they're about to call search and rescue or something on you, and
Or she may have been thinking, finally.
yeah, maybe in my case it was just
I hate to say it, I hate to break it to you.
great, call Salvation Army. I get to clean the closet out.
Talk to somebody.
I got to go with my oldest son just for a few days and my wife down to Escalante, and we only got to day hike in there. We did a couple of little slot canyons, kind of the main ones. I think they were called Peekaboo and Spooky. And they're kind of trade routes. If you're going to do two, they're easy to get to. And I will say though, there were quite a ways down, a forest road or a BLM road or whatever it was called.
That 50-mile road, they call it.
Yeah, and we were getting directions. They're like, go 26 miles down there, turn.
What they call it.
Yeah, and we were getting directions. They're like, go 26 miles down there, turn left on another road and go up to the dead end. And that's the start of the trail. And, there were cairns out there. That's abnormal for Southern. We have blazes. And so you're spotting cairns. We went out ill prepared, didn't have a map. We had some verbal directions from the lobby host when we left the hotel, and we got a bit turned around, but it was super beautiful in there. And is that
I like slot canyons. I don't know how you feel about it, Dawson, but I just don't know how to describe the feeling entering a slot canyon. Magical, return to childhood wonder,
playground.
Part of you wonder,
playground.
Part of you quiets down because you're in the bosom of the earth. I mean, I don't know quite how to describe these odd feelings that
you're
pop
doing a
up,
pretty good job. So you keep
well,
yeah. I feel like I'm listening to you read a book. This is good stuff, man.
But there's something about it that's rather irresistible, and it's just so great. And that peekaboo loop is just outstanding. I like slot canyons.
We had the best day in there. I think when you get into a slot canyon, listener, and you've not been to a slot canyon, they can get squeezing thin. So you can be anywhere from 50 feet below the ground line to hundreds of feet below, and it can narrow down to shoulder width or even a little less. And and it could be technical climbing, it could be walking, or there could even be some water in these things. And the sun doesn't always shine, so they can be very shadowy down in there. But the layers of the sandstone and the contour where the water has sculpted these things, you just can't see those shapes virtually anywhere else.
No, you can't. And they're sinuous. They're so beautiful. the Navajo Nation, which is where this trip is. I had an extraordinary. Whoops. You guys still there?
Oh, we're still here. Yeah,
Yeah.
It's part of it. Don't worry about it.
Sorry, I heard a little beep there. Okay.
No, we're good.
Anyway, I had a rare invitation to a station decades and decades ago, and we took our backpacks down it. It took 2 or 3 days to go down this thing, and at the end of our first day, the slot it wasn't that narrow. I mean, it was 20, 30, 40 feet wide, and maybe there was 100 feet of rock above us before 40 feet wide, and maybe there was 100 feet of rock above us before the mesa. But halfway through the next day, we were in a place further downstream, although you hardly think of it as a stream, where our headlights, we had to wear headlights, our headlights were on, and the sandstone sides of this slot were covered with tens of thousands of daddy long-legged spiders. It wasn't an awful thing. It wasn't scary. It was incredible. As your light played across the canyon walls, the reflection of worldly. We moved on another hour or two into the deepest part of this thing, and our trip leader said, "Hey," he said, "let's turn off our headlights and headlamps and see what we've got down here." And we were a party of 6. We turned off our headlamps, let our eyes adjust, and we turned off our headlamps, let our eyes adjust, and we couldn't see anything. It was completely black, dark. Not a single iota of sunlight got down to this place. Turned on our headlamps and worked another couple hours before we finally broke out of the thing.
Wow.
There's some bizarre and amazing places up there.
Years and years ago, you and I and several other folks and a group from La Sportiva,
Yes.
and your daughter,
Yes.
we went.
Well, we were
Some
we
of
were
those,
not
some
far
of those
from
desert
Cedar Mesa.
margaritas.
Yeah, we were not far from Cedar Mesa. We were not far from Bears Ears, and we camped at the edge of a place called Fry Canyon, and we did a couple of let's see now, Dawson. We did some canyon rappelling into pools and all that. We did the Black Hole. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Further down the road towards Lake Powell in White Canyon. The Black Hole is another slot canyon, folks. It's a day trip, and it's magnificent. It's one of these slot canyons where probably swim. Your feet can't touch the bottom, and you're paddling along, pushing your waterproof pack in front of you, trying to get to the other end. Let's see. So we did the Black Hole, and then and then we went up to Cedar Mesa. And we did a visit of one of the famous Indian ruins up there, and our guide brought us there on the night of the first full moon of the summer solstice or something.
Hank Moon, by the way.
Yes, and one of these ruins apparently was set up by ancient astronomers because as the moon rose over the horizon, a beam of moonlight entered a hole in the wall of this ruin and landed upon a moon design in the interior of the room.
It's like Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Yeah, it was that night.
Yeah.
Well, if you got lost, okay. You just could sacrifice Dawson or something at that point. That would have appeased the gods. I just want to say one thing, and then I know Dawson is going to take it back over, but I was looking at some pictures that I found that you sent Dawson, and one of the pictures you're in the desert, and I just had it written down to say, so I may have to say this and get echo back to me. But the picture I saw reminded me of some of my favorite movies. I'm an old John Wayne fan, huge John Wayne fan, and one of the pictures is of you walking across the desert, and the first thing I thought of, and I went and looked it up, is the picture of the movie The Searchers, with John Wayne out in the desert. And I went and looked it up, is the picture of the movie The Searchers with John Wayne out in the desert. And I thought, man, he is actually living the Western stories that I grew up watching with John Wayne and all those old movies, because most of those old movies were made somewhere out west. I don't know exactly where, but it looked a lot like some of the pictures you sent Dawson.
Yeah, 2 in it.
I think it was 2.
Yeah, it was 2.
And you were off trail walking.
Yeah, that shot was taken in Death Valley. We haven't even talked about that. I mean, there's too much to talk about, right? But the Death Valley and the Mojave Desert, another area of vast scale.
Desert and having no water, and that's exactly what it looked like. And I was like, man, he's living it. He's living out the West.
Yeah.
I remember on our trip that the directions. I was sitting in the back seat when we were driving out there, and I think it was Marvin Webb driving out there, and I think it was Marvin Webb said, "We're looking for a pair of climbing shoes on a post next to a dirt road, and we'll turn left." And that was kind of Clint. That was kind of I mean, this was kind of pre-cell phone. We definitely didn't have iPhones back in the day, so you actually had kind of written directions and, a paper map, and you were heading out to, find some, road that you were turning off of. And sure as the world, there it was when we drove down, and our guides had prepped a camp and were waiting on us, and it was good times.
It really was. Really memorable.
Well, Dave, we're getting close to the end, and when you get close to the end, what we like to do is we like to put our guest, and we've been kind of doing this all the way through, on the spot and ask for a story. And it can be about anything. We've had kayakers talk about the desert. We've had paddleboarders talk about rock climbing. It can be anything you want it to be for a couple of minutes. But is there something that just in all for a couple of minutes? But is there something that just in all your adventures that just stands out that is memorable for any reason to you?
Oh, I've got a story. This was kind of scary. Yeah, I got a story. It was scary and magnificent, and I'm glad I went through it. I was on a trip and some other friends. And this is one of these off-trail things I was talking about, one of these big loop trips. And we decided as part of our backpacking trip that we were going to try to climb one of the canyon summits, those aisles that poke up out of the center of the Grand Canyon. This one was called Vishnu Temple. And we left our camp down in Vishnu Canyon, and it was hard work, kind of broke up through those layers that we were discussing earlier tediously, and finally we got up onto the summit ridge leading towards this big sandstone summit, and there we were. We had to pull out a little rope. It wasn't too difficult, but you had to have a rope really to get up this a little bit safely. And as we reached the summit, an electrical storm developed. It's not like there was lots of huge, big clouds everywhere, big dark clouds, but they were scattered all over the canyon in the distance. And what would happen is in this storm, this electric, funny tingling on your skin, and then the hair on the arms of on the skin of your arms, and maybe down on your legs would start to stand up a little bit. And if you had hair on your head, it would start to wave around. And as time progressed, it got to the point where you could take your finger. And just by arcing your finger in the air in front of your face, you could create a buzzing sound out of that because of the electrical charge in the air. Mm-hmm. And then all at once, out of the corner of your eye in the distance, you'd notice a lightning bolt hitting another distant butte inside the Grand Canyon. And in an instant, it was all gone. The buzzing stopped, the hair on your arms laid down, the hair on your head came back down to your head, and everything was absolutely calm and peaceful. It would start up again, and this whole process repeated about 5 or 6 times. And we were kind of stuck up there. It was difficult to move, and we were a fairly big party. There was 5 or 6 of us, so we had to spend more time doing things up there than I really wanted to. But it was a Grand Canyon experience I'll never, ever forget. Exciting, dramatic, and, as always in the Grand Canyon, really, really beautiful.
That's awesome.
That's a good story.
Dave,
Your stories beat my stories.
That's a good story.
Yeah.
Dave Baker, thank you for taking an hour out of your day out there. It's so good to catch up with you. I'd like to catch up out there. It's so good to catch up with you. I'd like to catch up again off mic. Hopefully there will be a time where I'm passing through your zone.
Well, we gotta hook up an Escalante or Bears Ears, Dawson. You can bring your van down, and
yeah, I'd love to do it.
I'll invite myself in for coffee, and we'll get some stuff.
And yeah, maybe late October, November. You know, when kind of the United States kind of opens up a little bit, and we can resume travel a little bit more. And you know, I've got a son now in Aspen and one in California, so
nice.
So I can divert from California. So.
Well, hey, Clint, Dawson, you guys make it so easy, so comfortable. It's been so fun talking to you. Thanks for guiding me through it. This has really been a pleasure.
No, thanks for having us.
Yeah, it was really nice talking with you. Thank you very much. And if you've enjoyed this, do me a favor. You may be listening on dayfirepodcast.com. Huge favor, go to dayfirepodcast.com. Listen to all of our past conversations. Feel free to leave us a review. Share it with your friends, and more great conversations like we've had with Dave today. Thank you again, sir. Appreciate it.
We'll see you later, Dave.